Hello, hello. My name is Cynthia Alonso Perez, and I am a first generation Chicana therapist. But I'm so much more than that. And that's why I decided to have a podcast and talk about things between my career, personal life, and really create a space, a brave space to have conversations that I've had with friends and new people I've met that have had a profound impact on my life. So I created this podcast with the hopes of having a space for these really magical conversations that inspire us to grow and share our stories and vulnerability. This podcast is called Confetti All Around, and I call it Confetti All Around because like I said, I'm not just a therapist. I am a woman. I am a mother of 3. My first journey into motherhood was as a stepmother, and that has really grown my character profoundly. And then I had 2 children biologically, and so that is so much of where my story has unraveled. And I call it Confetti All Around because when I was a new mother, I remember being in this postpartum fog and really just not knowing how I was feeling really detached from my spirit and my body. And I remember when I was just kind of in a fog, my toddler, my firstborn, would come around at like the perfect time, right when I needed it. And he would say, confetti all around. And he would like do this little jump and throw his hand in the air with like pretend confetti. And when I would look at him, it would like snap me out of this funk. And I would look at his beautiful glowing face and it would have this joyful expression. And then it would be like this little pause, like, do you see me, mama? And it was really in those moments that he would snap me out and I would see him. And I always just loved when he would give me that wake me up. And so I thought about how profound it is that he comes to me, snaps me out of it with confetti all around. And it's always sat with me. I remember writing it down on my phone, confetti all around. This is going to be something. And I just didn't know what. So for me, confetti all around is the stories, right? The celebration of expansion, of recreation, of a party, right? Of our joy. And then confetti all around also means to me, when I think of confetti, my scarcity mindset comes in of like, well, who's going to pick up this mess? And I really think that this is what I want to highlight on this podcast, the duality of our joy, right? The healing journey that we're on to really resist old patterns and be in our joy. So we want to talk about the confetti all around, the joy that we're in, the big leaps, the achievements, the hobbies, the creativity that we're reveling in. But I also want to hold space for the mess and all the little pieces that it took to build this confetti and this excitement and this celebration. So this podcast is a brave space to have duality and to have these big conversations about our light, but also about our shadows and the messiness that we have, but that how it can also lead us to our biggest celebration in our life. And it took me a while to decide that I was going to have a podcast. To be honest, 2020 hit and I was like, what you're not going to find me doing? You're not going to find me on a TikTok. You're not going to find me dancing on Reels, and I'm definitely not going to have a podcast. And that is because I saw so many people getting TikToks when the pandemic started. We were all isolated, like grown adults like me. And I was like, you're not going to find me doing that. And yet, I got to say, you might find me on Instagram dancing in Reels. And so guilty. You can find me on Instagram on rooted_in_reflection. And I decided to make Reels because I realized that I had a message to get out. As a healthcare worker, as a social worker, as somebody in the community, I really wanted to have honest conversations. So once I got over the real thing, I was like, look, I can do this my way with a message. It doesn't have to be pointless. It doesn't have to be tacky or shameful. I can choose to make reels that have a message and that, that I'm proud of. So I started doing the reels, and now I'm doing a podcast because I really want a space for these conversations to be. I find myself in the last 5 years really just being vulnerable, and the beautiful conversations I've had with my partner, with good friends, with new friends I've met on Instagram through the voice notes. We share some profound reflections. And the things we come around to in vulnerability with each other have been really transformational in my day to day, especially with this pandemic feeling so lonely. So I'm hoping to, have a space for these conversations here. But the other thing is I haven't seen podcasts that are going to be the way I want to do them. And I love podcasts. Let me tell you about my history with podcasts. Before the pandemic, I've always been a field worker. I've worked in the clinics, for a few years, but most of my job as a social worker, as a therapist, has been working in the field. And that means going to people's homes, their schools, really intimate spaces where you're in somebody else's territory. So when I would be driving, I really would focus on my self-care and my joy. So a lot of times I would drive throughout all of LA. I mean, all the way from Long Beach through to Manhattan Beach, all the way to Hollywood, to East LA, through the 110, the 5, the 60, the 405, the 110, south, north, you name it, I've been there. And what I loved about working in the field, besides being in people's homes, because I really love that, and besides finding the best food, I always got to eat somewhere new and try something tasty. And I always know, when I'm over here, I know what I want to try. I had a whole Yelp list dedicated to my field eats. But what I really also enjoyed about fieldwork was the companionship of my favorite podcasts. I loved listening to podcasts, especially in my postpartum funk. It was like an adult conversation in the car with me. It was nostalgia. It was interesting conversations. I used to really love murder podcasts of true crime. I haven't listened to as many true crime podcasts because I was going so heavy on it that I think that I needed to stop because it was making me a little too agitated. So I do love a good murder podcast. I also really love educational podcasts. I really love NPR. And my partner and I, whenever we're driving, we would love to put on a long playlist, like a serial playlist or like a whodunit. We also really love biographies. I love learning about someone's life. So if a podcast had like a series on somebody's life, I would love it. So podcasts have a really special place in my heart. I noticed in the pandemic when I started working from home, that's one of the things I missed. I missed my alone time. I missed being in the car and listening to a podcast and knowing that tomorrow I could catch up on it or, wanting to get back to that podcast episode. So I decided to create these, and my hope is just to connect with other people who might be feeling these things. I want to share a little bit about what to expect. And what to expect is, I don't know, we'll see. We're going to be expansive on here. We're going to be brave, that's for sure. And I really just want to be true to myself and my calling. I feel I have a calling right now that I know it's a calling because I never felt this way before. And that is the most magnetic part. And I really think that this podcast can also serve as like a timestamp on all of these kind of awareness nuggets that I've been finding. So I really want this podcast to hold space for these ideas, these conversations, and maybe one day my kids can listen to it and see that even in this really scary time of this pandemic where there's so much uncertainty, where I don't know how this country is gonna, get out of so many systemic problems, at least mom and dad did something, Mom used her voice to send a message and dad supported her. He did the tech and the podcast engineering, and together they held space for a very special moment in time, and they invited community, and maybe that will be our legacy. So that's really what I'm hoping with this podcast, and how I plan for this to go is to have different topics and exciting guests, but really it's all joy-centered. And I'm going to share a little bit about my journey of being an inner child type woman, how I got started, what inner child healing, reparenting myself has meant to me. I want to share some true stories. I consider myself a storyteller, and so I want to share a little bit about my journey with inner child work, but always giving you some science, some data, and just some questions to get the ball rolling for our self-awareness. I call myself a first-gen Chicana therapist, but even that feels a little bit removed, a little bit like a title somebody else gave me. So in this space, on this podcast, I'm not a therapist. I'm definitely not your therapist, right? I am just a host. I'm somebody holding space. I do, in this stage of my life, I do accept and walk into my position as a healer. I never thought I would be someone that was this confident and this brazen and this radical, but I am. And I am really in gratitude that I have found a purpose and I have found research that has inspired me so much that I've gathered it up and started creating workshops and holding space. But in this podcast, I really just want to hold space for vulnerability and connection. And so I am not a therapist. I am in this space someone that is learning and really excited about all the information and research there is out there. And also I am a storyteller for my ancestors. So I want to weave a lot of our stories, our indigenous stories, even if you're someone like me that's like, but what is my identity? Like, I'm first gen, so my parents aren't from this land, and I'm not from that land specifically. Like, where am I? So if you're straddling borders or straddling identities, I welcome you. I welcome us figuring it out together and some aha moments that we might have together, and really balancing the research with our legendary stories within our families. Maybe there's some stories that we haven't even uncovered yet that are key pieces to why we're feeling restless, why we might feel grief. So I will share with time in this podcast the journey of how I started as an inner child, a wounded inner child, looking for support as a therapist and a new mom. And I found myself diving into this inner child journey. And with that, I found information about polyvagal toning and the brain science and ACEs and really looking at epigenetics with a culturally centered lens and looking at my life through a social justice lens. And I really want to share how I've come to kind of like unravel myself, unfuck myself, and see the gifts that I have within me. And since finding them in these last 3 years, I just can't stop. I can't stop talking about it. I feel like because I've been in systems, I see that this information is stuff that people should talk about. It shouldn't be something that you have to pay a therapist to go see. I feel like these conversations should be had, and everything that we have to heal is within us, and maybe we just haven't unlocked it within us. So I think if you are feeling lonely, if you feel isolated, that this podcast can serve as the friends in your car to have these conversations with. And I hope that you keep this awareness with you throughout the week to unlock things within yourself, maybe that you've always known, but you haven't wanted to step into because maybe you didn't think you deserved all of this unlocked potential. Maybe you're afraid of the potential or power that you hold. So I hope that this podcast serves as reminders of, your legacy, your lineage, and the journey you're on now. I hope to host with compassion, with vulnerability, and with bravery. So stay tuned for more episodes. They're going to be joy-centered. They're going to take us back to our lineage. We're going to be talking about decolonization and therapy. And I also am going to be really honest about my experiences in mental health and what I see in the future of mental health, the opportunities I see. So thank you for being with me. And I want to leave with an apple and an onion. I used to always say this with my children. What are my apple and onion? So apple would be something that makes me happy, has made me happy, that I'm in gratitude for. And an onion is something that maybe I'm working through, that's brought me tears, that is difficult. So I'll ask every guest, what is their apple and onion? And I'll probably have some more questions that I always ask. But today it's just me. And my apple is gratitude. I have gratitude for my partner who always supports every idea I have and does the thing, sets it up, makes it happen with me. So I am in gratitude for this apple in my life that is my partner, who I realized just this month that my legacy is our relationship that I am the first woman in my family that I can think of. And I'm referring to my own mother, my grandmothers, and their mothers, that far back at least. I am the first woman in this legacy to have a husband that cares about them with such tenderness, that treats them well, that sees them, and that really is working through intergenerational trauma with me. I don't think the women in my family have had the time, space, or partners to be able to do this work. So I am in such gratitude that I have this partner, that I was able to not sabotage it, because I tried. You may hear about it later, but I've tried to sabotage this good thing when I didn't really see myself. And now that I love myself and see myself, my apple is so shiny for this partner of mine and being in this space with him. So that's my apple, and I know it's part of my legacy. My onion has been this grief I've been feeling for people's sadness, this disappointment I've been feeling in policies that we've been told are supposed to protect us and are these rules that everybody has to abide by. And yet me and everyday people that I know, good people that work so hard and are loving, we don't get these same benefits that corporations get, that billionaires get, that even federal programs that take so much money in their budget, that they get to be deceitful, they get to throw money around, not pass audits, while so many of us in the community, most of us in this country, are really anxious at all the terrible news we're hearing, all the lack of humanity. So my onion is a big one, but it's because I feel it so big, this grief. I know that we're all barely holding on right now. So my onion has been that, and I wanted to bring it up because I feel the heaviness of it. So with that, I want to acknowledge that this podcast, it will have heavy themes, it will have profound conversations, and yet those are necessary. I've lived my life too long in spaces where my emotions were told that they needed to wait, that it wasn't appropriate timing, that I should be lucky that I have it better than others. I don't want to live my life like that anymore, where I just keep my emotions down because other people cannot handle the bigness of them. So I invite you to feel with me here. I invite you to open your awareness and challenge yourself, but I really, really believe that you're going to see yourself with love, because that is what we really are. We are our inner children, and we have so much light within us. So I'm excited to get into this podcast. I am excited to really invite people to be vulnerable. I'm going to have my friends speak and some people that I admire. I admire my friends too, but I think they're going to agree to this, easier because they're my friends. But I really invite them to be vulnerable with me, and I appreciate their willingness, and I appreciate the privilege I have to capture these conversations and let them live on through recordings and podcasts. So you can find me at rootedinreflection.org. You can find me on Instagram at rooted_in_reflection. You can find our other Instagram at Confetti All Around. And I would love if you share this podcast with friends or coworkers, and stay tuned for more conversations. Feel free to email us if you have topic ideas at confettiallaround@gmail.com. Thank you.